Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Hildinger, and I'm a Sage 100 consultant with DWD Technology Group. With me this afternoon is Brad Prather. He is also one of our Sage 100 consultants. Due to the large number of people who are in attendance today, we do have the lines muted. And we ask that if you have questions, there is a questions box in your panel. If you would utilize that, we can address your questions fairly quickly. Brad can answer, or if I see something that I know is applicable to the whole group, we can certainly talk about it during the course of the session. Brad, you want to say good afternoon?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for attending and being with us this afternoon.
Okay. This is the second session of the year-end tips. I did one earlier this morning with Brad, and so because of the number of people, we decided to break it up into a couple of different sessions. So I'm going to go over the exact same material I did this morning. We are recording the session, so if you would like to get a copy of the recording, you are welcome to ask for one. We can make sure that you get a link to get that recording. If you registered late, you might not have the handouts. Please request those via the questions box with your email address, and we'll make sure that we get a copy of the handouts sent over to you. I know I spoke with Shannon, who was helping get this together, and she was getting a lot of folks who were registering late and was not able to get the handouts right away. So she'll get those out a little bit later on. All right, today we've got this session broken into two parts. The first part that we're going to discuss has to do with what we call the core accounting modules, predominantly general ledger, AR, and AP, and things that we want to deal with and things that we want to look at with regard to especially year-end closing, but it's always applicable to period-end processing as well. The second half of the session, we're going to discuss payroll. If any of you are not using the Sage 100 payroll and you care to opt out, by all means, feel free to drop off when we get to the break. If you want to take a look and see a little bit about what payroll is in Sage 100, feel free to stick around. We have no problem with that. And Brad and I will endeavor to answer all of your questions as they come along. If any of you needs CPE credit, we are offering up to 2 credits today. You'll get a credit per half. If you drop off, just request 1/2 of 1 credit. If you're going to stay for both sessions, you're welcome to request both credits. Shannon will help take care of that. Just forward an email to her, note that you're requesting credit, and let her know how many hours you are requesting, and we'll get those letters out either later this week or early next week. What we're going to cover this afternoon, for those of you who may not be familiar with DWD, we're going to review a little bit about who we are. We're going to talk about some important things with regard to the Sage 100 software. We're going to talk about closing modules. I know that's a question that we get very regularly. You know, when do I close a module? What order do I close them in? And then the last part of the first half, we're going to discuss some things that occur during the period end processing in AP, AR, and general ledger. DWD Technology Group. We are a division of Doolin Ward and Dewald CPAs, a full-service accounting firm. We've got offices located in Fort Wayne, Marion, and Indianapolis, Indiana. Fort Wayne is our primary office for our technology group. Brad represents our Indianapolis office. That gives us an opportunity to service the state of Indiana much better, as well as the tri-state area, Ohio, Michigan, Northeast Indiana. We do go over to Illinois as far as what we consider our local support, and we've got clients that are all over the country. So we service the majority of them from Fort Wayne, but many of you may have spoken with Brad in the past as well. We've got a number of software consultants on our team. We've got 6, 7 now on in our Sage 100 team. Those include programmers as well as software consultants. We also have an IT team some folks that can handle your networking needs. They're all certified, or almost all of them are certified Microsoft engineers, and many of them have been with us for, at least 10 to 15 years. I myself have been with DWD for just over 22 years now, and I have been working with the Sage 100 product for about 18 of those years. Mr. Brad?
I have been with DWD Technology Group for over 10 years. Actually, January will be 11 years, and I have worked with Sage 100/Mass90 for 21 years now, I think it is. So just FYI for anybody who's interested, when I started, it was still a DOS-based program. So that's how far back I go with the application.
Thanks, Brad. Brad and I are both what we consider recovering accountants. Both of us hold our CPA licenses, so that gives us some added ammunition to help you with business type of questions. And Brad and I happen to also be the payroll experts for our team. Some of the things that we do as a team, we offer training and support. We do new implementations. We help you with your upgrades. We've got a master developer on staff, and we also have some script writers. They can do customizations for your software. So if you need a little extra functionality that doesn't come out of the box, they can help you with that. We also do report writing. We do a lot of crystal reports. For those of you who've been around a little bit longer, FRX, you might recall, is the custom report writer tool that had been used. We still have a few folks that are using that, and we can help with that. Data conversion, if you need to migrate data from a platform into your Sage 100 or take data out of Sage 100 and get it over to another platform, we can assist with that. And that leads us to integrating with various kinds of external systems. Some other things that we do are related to what we call business intelligence. Some of you may be familiar with a product called Power BI. It's a tool offered by Microsoft that allows us to connect to the Sage data and set up various reports and dashboards. And those can even be published to the web if you need for your users to have access off-site. Brad is also our guru on the Sage Alerts, formerly known as Knowledge Sync. And if you've got questions about that, he can address those with you. We have offerings of manufacturing efficiency add-ons, things like work order scanning and work order efficiency and warehouse automation. We can help with those types of requests. And we also have a Sage CRM guru on staff, and he can help with your customer resource management and then also website integrations as well. Excuse me. Let's take a look at this matrix here. Sage's philosophy over the past number of years has been that it will support the current version and the 2 prior versions. So you notice I've got 2018, 17, 16, and 15 listed here. Theoretically, version 2015 is obsoleted according to Sage software. That means they do not provide any more updates. And if you need to do any 1099 printing or W-2 printing, we need to talk about getting you moved up to at least 2016 or 2017 in order to facilitate that. So if you are on version 2015 or prior, you will not be able to process your own 1099s or W-2s. You can see the retirement dates for the versions. You'll note that 2016 will be retired officially by Sage at the end of September this coming year. 17 and 18 move out corresponding years after that. The rumor is that Sage 2019 will become available probably first or early second quarter of this coming year. So we've got some things that can be moving forward with that. When I talk about year-end especially, I have a couple of little acronyms that are commonly thrown amongst us as consultants, and you might see these acronyms as well and not be sure exactly what they mean. The first acronym is the IRD, the Interim Release Download. This is a critical piece of software that needs to be installed for at least your version 2016 and 2017 in order to facilitate year-end program changes for the payroll and accounts payable modules. It also updates some program changes for the Atrix e-filing and reporting. The other little acronym is the TTU, or the Tax Table Update. And up through and including version 2017, so really versions 2016 and 2017 only, you will be able to get the tax table update for the first quarter of 2019. With the advent of 2018, Sage 100 2018, payroll has been drastically redesigned, and the tax update functionality is actually embedded within the software and happens automatically. So we won't be using tax table updates for very much longer. It will all blend through the software itself. I checked the website this morning. The updates are not yet available. The rumor is that they will be available probably by next Wednesday. If it happens a little bit earlier, that's awesome. It's usually not much later than the date that they indicate. Do I need to install this IRD? Yes, technically for at least versions 2016 and 2017, you do have to have the IRD installed. You have to be current with whatever version prior to the installation of the IRD. So if you don't have that installed from this last year, the 2017 IRD, you will need to install that and then install the 2018 IRD. You will note again that version 2015 is not supported, so you won't be able to install an IRD in that version. One thing that we do caution you on is if you've got any customized solutions. They could be third-party enhancements. They could possibly be custom programs that perhaps David Overholt has written for you. We want to make sure that installing the IRD does not conflict with any of those enhancements. So if DWD is not your reseller, please check with your reseller. If you don't have a reseller or we are your reseller, let us know, and we will be more than happy to look at this with you and give you advice on what can or can't be installed. Pardon me again. The next topic I want to go into is to discuss the order of closing modules. This question comes up very, very regularly with my clients, and I'm sure with Brad's clients as well. In the software, and I'm going to pop over to show you the menu, with the traditional ordering of the modules, it was typically easy to say start at the bottom and work your way up. So if you get into a module, for example, job cost, and it has a period end processing, or purchase order, or sales order, each of those will have a period end folder, and that means that's a module that needs to be closed. So it used to be pretty easy to say start at the bottom and work your way up, but Sage actually has a recommended order of closing, and I want to present that so that you've got it documented. If you've got the manufacturing modules, such as work order and bill of materials, you want to, first of all, make a copy of your company. That's usually a safety net, and I have enough paranoia in my life that I want to make sure that I'm not going to lose something if something disastrous happens during the process. If you don't remember how to make a backup, what we're going to do is go to the Library Master module of your software. Under the main folder, we will go into the company maintenance function, and you are welcome to use an existing company code that is not a live company, or you can simply type in a company code that is new. If it's brand new, the company name will not exist. You can go ahead and type in what name you want to give it. The company information doesn't come over and does not get copied over when you make a copy of a company. So if you're going to make a backup for a purpose that you need to print forms and reports, you probably will want to fill this information in. We're going to select the copy function, and the software is going to indicate that if you only copy specific modules, you might not be able to view things that you would otherwise expect to view. For example, if I only copy the general ledger and the AR module, but something leads me to purchase order or AP, I wouldn't be able to see that current information correctly. Go ahead and accept that. And now I want to pick my source. So it is key to note that when I start to make a copy, I always specify the destination company, because I will pick the source from which I copy at a later point. And I go ahead and hit proceed, and it will walk through and ask me if I want to copy all the data. If I didn't want to copy certain modules, I could deselect it, but I typically recommend, unless you're having problems with space, copy everything over. It's just a little bit safer. Once we've made that backup, then starting with the bill of materials module, it is toward the bottom of our list. That would be the first module we would close. Because bill of materials feeds into work order processing, we would then want to close that module. The barcode module, that's what helps facilitate the ease of data entry when we are scanning things. That one would then close next, because these all tend to feed into purchase order and so on. So basically, we're kind of walking through manufacturing modules. We get into the distribution modules, and then we get into what we consider the accounting modules. Now, notice job cost is close to the last module. Even though in our list it is down a ways from the layout of the module listing, because so many things feed into job cost, it is advised to close it after the other modules get closed. And then you'll note the last module we close is our general ledger. So general ledger can be left open for a few periods, especially at the end of the year, because we're waiting on maybe adjusting transactions from our accountants after they've done our financial statements and or our tax returns. Even though we do close a module eventually, though, it is possible to reopen most of them. The only one that we caveat against that is the payroll module, because that is a quarterly module, and there are very, very, very specific things that will get lost if we reopen a period and then try to reclose it. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. We want to make sure that we help you through this process correctly. So now that we've got a pretty decent handle on closing the modules, let's talk a little bit about what happens when we do a period or year-end process in the software. To get ready for closing a module, and it doesn't matter which module it is, you want to make sure that all your data entry is updated and posted. So thinking back at that flow, that order flow of closing the modules, we certainly would want to make sure that work order and purchase order are closed prior to closing accounts payable, and that all outstanding data entry has been posted. And that includes the daily transaction register. A lot of people forget that. It happens sometimes that they might get half of the transaction posted. We might get the invoice detail in or the receipt of goods entry in, but for whatever reason, the daily transaction register does not get closed. If you want to check before you start doing any of the closing processes, go to the General Ledger module, go to the main folder, and select the daily transaction register. The ideal is that this comes up blank, and if it does not, then that tells us that there are transactions that are sitting out there that never got finished. So as an example here, I've got an AP General Ledger entry that never hit the books. That can also lead to issues with reconciling, especially if these are much more than a month old, because that means you closed books of prior periods without all of the data being intact, or somebody tried to backdate something that they shouldn't have. So the goal is that this does not show up at all. We get a message that says the file is empty. In this case, we probably need to get this stuff posted because it is going to have an effect on especially a year end. Some things that you would do as part of your closing process, and again, this doesn't matter whether it is period end or year end. We would like to maybe get snapshots of things like our AP aging report, the AP trial balance report. Maybe you want to get a check history report for that month. It would be ideal to pick all these off ahead of time, because that will help the closing process go a little bit more quickly and probably a little bit more smoothly. Just in talking about these two reports here especially, a lot of times people see AP trial balance and they get a little weirded out because they think that it is something to do with general ledger information. It is not your general ledger trial balance. It is merely a tool that reports transactions that were posted within the specified period that relate to accounts payable invoices, and it's actually better for the AP trial balance report to reconcile to your general ledger because it is looking at the timing issues. You know, I can't even tell how many times we've got people who will post invoices in one period, but they don't have the right general ledger date, and then they don't understand why their GL doesn't tie out to their aging report. Using the trial balance report, that can help us figure out what those transactions are and how we need to move them to get things to reconcile correctly. Some other reports that you might want to consider grabbing snapshots of, and you can grab a snapshot by printing it to deferred printing. You can utilize the Paperless Office function. All of you on these more current versions of Sage will have Paperless Office capabilities. If it's not set up, we can certainly assist you with that. But things like a vendor purchase analysis report, any of the reports that say monthly in their title, the AP analysis report, those things will be purged for the period that gets closed. So if I don't run one of those first couple 3 reports before I do my period end closing, I won't be able to go back to them because those are very period-specific reports. Your check history report, there's a setting in your options on how many months to retain check history. That can max out at 99, but if you get beyond that, you might lose some of those details related to check history. So as many reports as you can gather ahead of time, whether you print them on paper or print them to the deferred printer or print them as a PDF or save them paperless, all of that information is just good backup information for you, especially at year end. And year end doesn't have to be the calendar year end, it's your fiscal year end. I know some of you have different fiscal year ends than others, but talking about this kind of stuff relates exactly to your fiscal year end. Pardon me. What happens when we do year-end processing for the AP module? As I mentioned, I'm going to actually skip down to this bottom part here, the number of months to retain check history, a maximum of 99 months. Those things prior to that date will start to drop off. The other thing that's important to note is with regards to your invoice inquiries that you do. So many of us like to go right to the vendor, either the vendor maintenance or the vendor inquiry, and be able to drill down to see invoices that were paid to that vendor. I get the call frequently, I can't find this invoice anymore. Where did it go? Well, depending on the number of days to retain paid invoices, history is pretty much permanent unless you choose to get rid of the history. But the invoices that you can inquire upon from the vendor maintenance or the vendor inquiry are in what is called the AP open invoice file. Those can get purged out as we pass the number of days to retain those paid invoices. If you want to inquire upon them, you have to use the invoice history inquiry in order to see anything that has been dropped out of the open file. Anybody have any questions so far? Again, you are welcome to either raise your hand on your control panel or by all means type the questions in for us. First of all, that gives us a record of the questions, so in case we miss something, we can always follow up with you. If you want to just raise your hand, I can open up specific lines to let people talk or however we need to proceed. Since we're still in accounts payable, I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about handling 1099s. And 1099 reporting and filing is handled through a utility that is produced by a company called Atrix. It is an add-in that works directly with Sage 100 as well as a number of other accounting software packages. In order to get the updates that are required for the current form information, you must have an active maintenance or support plan with Sage. When you go to print the 1099s, you must have the pre-printed red forms for the federal filing. Recipients may be printed on blank forms, typically a 4-part perforated form, and the 1096 summary will actually get printed. The data will print. If those of you who've been around for a while remember the old way of doing the 1099s, we actually had to type that up manually. We don't have to do that anymore, but it must be printed on a pre-printed red form. The government will not accept submissions of anything but those red forms. What we'll do next, I want to do just a real quick blip and show you what that looks like. So we're in accounts payable. Rather than being in your period end processing, it's actually listed in your reports. And what we are headed for is our Form 1099 reporting or e-filing and printing. I am demonstrating from the 2018 version here today, but most of the stuff that I'll show you is very, very, very similar to the older versions. And I got to flip over to my other company. A good question came across, if we e-file, do we still need the pre-printed forms? Technically, if you let Atrix handle all of your filing, which again will have its own fee structure associated with it, you don't need any forms at all. You can go ahead and print your company copies on plain paper. That will put 4 recipients per page. But if you're going to have Atrix push everything for you, they will handle all of the forms. We can do 3 different types of 1099s. We can do dividend, we can do interest, or we can do miscellaneous. The most common type for the majority of us is the miscellaneous form. So we want to make sure we select that. If we are starting from scratch, we can do new, or if we've already run through the process and we want to come back and revisit a filing or correct a filing, we would go into history so that we don't have to start all over. We want to make sure that we've got the proper year. I don't have a 2018 in my data set at the moment, but I'm going to just make this work. We would have all our company information, and with Atrix, company information comes from the company maintenance screen. If that is not filled in, or if you're using a backup company, this will be blank, and especially it will get angry if we do not have a federal ID number in order to continue. So at a bare minimum, you've got to at least get a federal ID number in there, and ideally your company name. If you can, just go back into company maintenance and plug in that information. That way you don't have to retype it every time you get in. If you have a little note down here that says demo mode, that means that Sage has not validated your subscription. You can click on the activate button and go out and have Sage confirm your information. If your demo mode goes away, then that means you've activated properly and your forms will print properly. Otherwise, you're going to get a big watermark that says demo, do not file on your forms. We'll go ahead and we can specify the minimum. So if we've got thresholds, typically the non-employee compensation is set at $600, but if you've got attorneys, they always get a 1099, so you can't necessarily block them out, but you also note that attorneys go into its own box, not the non-employee compensation box. Go ahead and accept. And Atrix will walk us into a wizard. Now, my reporting year is off, and it's telling me that I'm being silly, but I'm just going to go ahead and continue here for the moment. And we walk through the wizard here to answer a few additional questions. The first one is, do you want to do any kind of test drives, or do you want to just start processing? I don't care for the test drives. They confuse me because I forget that it's just a test drive and any of the changes that I make aren't going to lock in for reality. I just pretty much always start processing. It will ask you to confirm your taxpayer ID number. That should be your federal ID for your company. Do you have multiple Sage companies that are using the same federal ID number that you need to consolidate? If that's the case, we can process this and make a bunch of sub-files that we can roll into one, that we can get one total summary for our 1096 and have all our 1099s come out. Otherwise, we're just going to use our single company. Again, we have our Payor information, so you would definitely want to make sure that you have the required fields in there. I think it's going to bark at me if I don't have something. Which is nice. It tells you when you've forgotten to put something in. And let's see if it'll let me go. Oh, it wants phone number, so yep. Go ahead and continue. I would say 99.9% of the time we are filing for our own company. Unless you're a third-party CPA or tax preparer, you will almost always choose this first option here. We may get prompted for some state or local tax items. Indiana does not require withholdings on the vendor 1099 payments, so we don't have to really worry about that, but it will want us to make sure that we have a valid number in there. Otherwise, it will get angry at us. Do we have any recipients who only want their forms sent electronically? Is this your organization's final return? Is that the unfortunate circumstance that you have gone out of business? Or maybe you've won the lottery and you've sold your business and you don't care anymore. Either way, yes or no, is this your final return? On the recipient forms, do you want to display their entire ID number? I recommend this mostly because if the number is invalid, the recipient can see the entire number and then should notify you that it needs to be corrected. If we mask it out with stars or X's, if any of these first few digits is incorrect, we would not know that, nor would your recipient. If the recipient hasn't provided you with an ID number, do you want to leave the field blank or do you want to print zeros? I recommend printing the zeros because it's going to jump out at you as something that has not been filled in. Once we get into the 1099 processing, it's going to come out and drop all of our information into a grid. And one thing I neglected to mention, during this time of year, it is pretty rampant that you will get updates from Atrix. When you kick off the 1099 printing, if there is an Atrix update that has been detected, it's going to ask you to install that update. So you'll click on a button that says automatic updates. You'll walk through that little installation wizard and then get back into this spot where you get into the question and answer and now into the data preparation. On the left-hand side, we will see the static information of the payee. On the right-hand side, we would see the numeric information of what had been remitted to them during the course of the calendar year. So 1099s are always a calendar year, regardless of what your fiscal year is. We walk through the wizard here, and it's going to ask us to confirm information. If it finds anything invalid, it will stop us and not let us proceed until we correct whatever needs to be corrected. From the filing state perspective, this is typically Indiana, if you're an Indiana business, because you want to say, hey, I am issuing this from the state of Indiana. You might have to change that, because I have seen in the past where Atrix picks up the actual payee's state location. Once we get through all of that, we're going to get dropped into a little commercial here. It's going to offer you, hey, I will do all of this stuff for you after you put the data in, and it gives you some pricing information. If you opt not to have all of your documentation processed by Atrix, you can pick a la carte what you would like. So the complete service will be a minimum charge or the lesser of the actual number of recipients. If you opt to print, you may print your recipient copies on that 4-part perforated paper. You may or may not e-file. If you choose not to e-file, then you would certainly be printing your federal copy and your state copy if that's applicable as well. You will note that that costs you nothing other than the paper on which you print it. They'll offer you some more commercials along the way. And divider sheets basically will be sections so that if you're printing a number of copies, it will pop a little divider page in there to help you separate that out. The review data, this is just a summary of what you are going to do. I get a lot of people who are tempted to click on print. Please don't do that, because all that will do is print this list out very nicely for you so you have a paper copy of the steps that you're taking. You'll go ahead and hit next. And it's going to walk you into the preview of the various copies of the reports. You'll note on the copy A, it looks like it's going to print all the grid lines and all the special text. Please don't be fooled by that. This is just a visual so that you know what information should go in which boxes. If you try to print this out, it's actually going to just be the hard data. It will not be any of the form lines or any of the other printing. That's why we must have the red copies. The 1096 is the exact same way. It is going to expect a pre-printed form. Otherwise, it will just print out the plain data without any grid lines. The recipient copy, however, this one is a little different. It will print these grid lines for us and all of the box descriptions. It does expect a 4-part perforated paper. I have had people get away with just printing on plain paper, but that is at your call. If you know that your recipient needs to include a paper copy to file, you can make them cut it apart themselves, but if you've got the perf paper, it will make it easier for them. If you need to send instructions, so if they are going to go on plain paper, you do need to send instructions to the recipient, so you'll need to print this page out. And then at the end, we'll print our internal copy, and there will be 4 recipients per page. So it will summarize just a single copy of each recipient in each block. And that pretty much takes care of processing the 1099s. You'll notice the status. I have printed the payer copy. I've printed the various copies. If I need to come back in and correct anything, then I've got some menu choices here. Maybe I need to start over. Maybe I can correct completed ones. We have the ability to go back in even though we have finished processing. If you choose to e-file and you need to correct it, you can correct it with Atrix as long as it gets corrected before they submit it to the feds. Otherwise, you will incur additional cost. So be aware of that. Does anybody have any questions on processing 1099s? Okay. Let's run back over and talk a little bit about the accounts receivable module. Accounts receivable is the mirror module to accounts payable, so a lot of these things will look pretty similar. When we're getting ready to do our period end processing or our year-end processing, we want to make sure that all of the data is updated and posted, especially if there is data in related modules. So if I've got sales order invoices that I have not yet updated, it's a good idea to update them. Job costs also, if I've got job cost billings, I probably want to make sure that those things get updated as well. If I'm charging my customers finance charges, this is the time that we would go through and run the finance charge calculation and update the finance charges to their accounts. If I need to print statements, we're going to do that as well. And very much like what we did with accounts payable, if we've got any particular reports that we want for this period, this is a good time to print them. And even though we have the ability to print them at the time of closing, I really recommend let's get all the reports done first, because it will make the closing process much quicker. We don't have to keep people out of the software for as long. We have an aged invoice report. We have an AR trial balance report. Again, the aged invoice report is related to the date of the invoice. The AR trial balance report is related to the general ledger posting date that had occurred when you updated those transactions. Just like in AP, we've got a handful of reports that might get purged out or have that data purged or consolidated when we do a period or a year-end processing. The analyses reports, customer sales type things, those we want to make sure we get them before we do our closing just to get the current data. Again, anything that says monthly in its title is going to be for the current period only. So once we close November into December, if I go back and run, if I want to try to run a November sales report, I can't do it from the monthly sales report function. When we do, especially a year-end processing, what happens? Again, we're going to see some similarities to the payables. Things that are in the retained paid invoices, the number of days to retain paid invoices. Again, we can set that up to 999 days. Those invoices are being purged from the open file only if they are at a $0 balance. And that means that they may not be visible on the customer maintenance or customer inquiry screens. We can always go to invoice history inquiry and we can review those invoices, but we couldn't do that from the customer record after we've done the closing and the number of days has elapsed. The monthly cash receipts file, that will also get purged when we do our period end processing. If we've got temporary customers and those customers have a $0 balance, they may be purged unless we have opted to retain those temporary customers. Okay. In inventory, I know I didn't really have that listed, but it is kind of prevalent to talk about. Year end is typically a time where we're going to do physical counts. Obviously, you can do physical counts anytime you wish, especially if you're doing cycle counts. You want to freeze your inventory pretty much at the last day of that period, whether it be a month end or a year end, and you want to get your worksheets out. We want to be careful how we count, because with Sage 100, it is possible to continue doing day-to-day work. I can do receipt of goods entries. I can do sales order invoices and ship product. But we have to be careful with how we count what's truly on the shelf, because that will have an adverse effect on the physical count adjustments. Go ahead and get all that stuff entered, get that posted. If you've got any other inventory transactions that are sitting out there, any kind of transfers between warehouses, any kind of adjustment functions, make sure all of that gets updated as well. If you're using FIFO or LIFO valued inventory, you would want to run the negative tier report. This looks at your cost layers, and if for some reason your inventory dipped negative, you will see an over-distributed layer in your inventory. Even though your quantity on hand might show 0, if you look at your cost detail, you might see a negative 10 layer and a positive 10 layer. The net of that, of course, is 0, but they are still two distinct layers within the software, and they may act inappropriately when we're trying to pull inventory out. So get those layers merged so that you just have a net layer, even if it is a 0, and it will basically clean that up for you and hopefully keep your costs actually more accurate. The inventory valuation report, that one is I'm running it as of the day that I run it, and that is my valuation as of the day that I run it. There is an inventory valuation report by period. In years past, that has not always been super accurate. It is better now that we are on the new business framework for the inventory module, but your inventory valuation report is still as of the moment in time that you run it, and that can be used to reconcile to your general ledger at the end of that period. If you're using the purchase order module, you probably want to grab your purchases clearing report. It also is as of the moment in time that you run it. That's the report that verifies quantity ordered versus quantity received versus quantity invoiced, and lets you know what POs are still considered incomplete, or incomplete, I guess, whatever the word should be. Once you get all of that reconciled and rolled up, we can look at the general ledger itself. And again, this is typically the last module that gets closed, because once the GL closes, you can't post into a prior period. This is often a safety net, especially at year end. Once you get your year end adjustments from your accountants, you want to get that GL closed at least into the first period of the current year to keep anybody from altering data that represents published financial statements. If you've got recurring journals, you can go ahead and get those posted. If you're doing budgeting within Sage 100, you can enter your budget revisions and update the budget revision register. By all means, you want to make sure that your trial balance is in balance. If it's not, then we look at one-sided entries that will get it back into balance. It's possible that a journal might still be sitting out in your daily transaction register. In fact, General Ledger will not allow you to close if there is any open data in the daily transaction register. If you're using allocations, the function allows you to take a value that is in an account and redistribute it to multiple accounts based on various percentages or whatever criteria. You want to run those allocation journals. You've got reports that you might want to print. Especially if you're using Paperless Office, this is great because instead of printing out volumes and volumes of trial balance or general ledger detail report information, we can push it off to a PDF and stick it in our electronic filing cabinet. So any of the reports that you want, by all means, grab them ahead of time. What happens when we do our year-end processing? Well, when we get to the end of our fiscal year, the net income or loss from your activity gets closed into your retained earnings account. So Sage does a behind-the-scenes entry that we don't really see, but we know that it has happened, and it takes that net profit or loss and dumps it into the retained earnings so that your future balance sheet will show that reflected. Based on the number of years to retain transaction or summary history, beginning balances will get recalculated. So if I'm only retaining a couple of years of transaction history and a couple of years of summary history, when I go in to close into 2019, things that are 2017 and prior will get recalculated. And then if you've got auto budgets enabled, those budgets will get calculated for the new year. This pretty well wraps up the first half of this afternoon's presentation. I did move moderately quickly, just there is a lot of information that needs to be covered to keep things on time. But I do want to open up the floor if anyone has any questions. We really didn't have very many questions going on this afternoon. We had quite a few this morning. But if you all are comfortable, that is great. If you've got questions, by all means, please type them into us, and Brad and I will address them with you.
I've got just one comment here, Mary, on that auto budget, simply because it's something that I know has happened to some clients of mine over the years. If you actually do your own budgets and enter that information, you'll want to go into your general ledger options setups in that budget tab and make sure that that box is unchecked to automatically create that budget. Because unfortunately, I've had a couple times where my clients have spent a number of hours entering the budgets only to do a period in processing and have all that overwritten. Ouch. with that automatic budget feature. So just kind of a heads up, FYI, it's in the general ledger options. There is a budget tab and there's a little checkbox. So at one point in time, I think what happened was I think that checkbox came default to yes, I believe, is how this ended up happening. And I'm not sure that it defaults to yes anymore. But I would recommend checking that again if you do your own budget work. So. Right.
That was that the checkbox you were talking about, Brad?
That is it. Yes, that is. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
I see a hand raised. Diane, do you need me to open your line, or do you want to type your question over to us? Diane, if you've got a microphone on your computer, I've opened your line. And if you're trying to speak, unfortunately, your microphone is not active. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and offer a break. If we don't have any other questions at the moment, we will follow up with a question and answer session at the end of the second part. If you are not interested in sticking around, you are welcome to exit the webinar. If you've got any questions, by all means, you're welcome to contact Brad or me along the way, and we will do our best to either answer you or find the person who can answer you. And you are welcome to request your CPE. Again, if you wish CPE, email Shannon. Her email address is listed. Ask her for credit and let her know how many credits you would like. Preferably be honest. If you're only sticking around for one part of this, ask for one credit. If you're here for both parts, feel free to ask for both credits. We're going to take a little break here. I've got about 5 till 2. I will come back in about 10 minutes, and we'll get the second portion started where we will review payroll. So anybody that wants to exit, feel free to do so. Thank you so much for attending. We've appreciated you. And if you want to stick around, come back for more fun. We'll be back in about 10 minutes. All right, let's go ahead and get started here with the latter portion. We're going to talk about payroll-specific information, so if you're not interested, feel free to drop off. If you want to stick around, hang out with us, and we'll go over some topics on payroll. And we'll talk to you a little bit about the 2018 version of payroll, as that is new. I do notice a hand up. If that is just that you're here, you can go ahead and put your hand back down. If you've got a question, feel free to type those in for us. We can monitor them a little bit better. Again, if you need CPE, feel free to request that from Shannon. She'll get those letters out for you probably late this week or early next week. And we are going to breeze through. It looks like most of you folks are here from earlier, so I may not have to go through a lot of details, but we'll go ahead and get rolling here. Again, who we are, we're DWD Technology Group, and Brad and I have been Sage 100 consultants for a number of years. We're both CPAs, and we can help you with a lot of your questions. The other thing that's the beauty of being aligned with a CPA firm is if there are questions that we don't know, we've got resources whom we can ask as well. Just very quickly, things that we do: training, upgrades, customizations, report writing, help you integrate with Power BI or Sage Alerts. For those of you who are in the manufacturing realm, we've got offerings of efficiency solutions, and we can help you with integration to perhaps a storefront if that is something that you're interested in, or if you've got contact resource management requirements, we can assist with that. We also work with alongside another Sage 100 consultants team. They are called Convergence Technologies, and they are experts in HRMS, or Human Resources software. So if anybody has any requests related to that, feel free to reach out, and we can point you to those folks to help implement that solution for you as well. With regard to payroll, back in 2013, that was the last year that Sage maintained and supported 1099 printing and W-2 printing in the old style. So if you've been around for a number of years, you probably remember what that old style is. You might have had to move the lines up and down by just simply telling it it's going to print on line 22 instead of on line 23. The old cranky forms that were always very difficult to get laid out. Starting with version 2014, they paired up with a company called Atrix, and Atrix works with not only Sage 100 but a number of other accounting software packages, and it facilitates the e-filing and reporting that you can use to process your year-end forms. With that, there are additional fees if you opt to e-file. Those fees are payable directly to Atrix. We have to get you registered with them if you want to do the e-filing process. If you're going to just print everything out on your own, there is no additional charge for that. That comes with your software. But what you have to note is that software has to be installed on the workstation or workstations from which those forms get printed. Just a reminder of the supported versions. 2015 and prior is not compatible, cannot be used for your year-end processing this year. Versions 2016, 17, and 18 are all compatible, but you'll notice that 2016 will become obsoleted next year. So if we're on version 2015 right now and you want to do your forms, we've got to bump you at least to 2016 or 2017. If you're on 2016 this year, you can still do it, but we're going to talk about upgrading you to the new version sometime next year. With that being said, if you're on 2015, we're not really in a position, due to the number of changes that have occurred with the 2018 payroll platform, we are not in a position to help you get that update done this year. We're holding off any new 2018 installations until after the first of the year. Brad and I get really, really busy helping people with year-end stuff through December and into January. So I'm not committing to anyone, at least until the first part of February, to talk about doing those upgrades. We can get you upgraded to 16 or 17 relatively quickly, as long as you don't have a lot of third-party apps or mods. But if you have questions on that and you need help, please reach out. We will be happy to assist in any way that we can. With regard to what is called the legacy version, the payroll that is functioning in versions 2016 and 2017, and the payroll, Sage calls it Payroll 2.0. That's the new platform. It's the new business framework, if you will. Things that we talk about. We talked about making a backup earlier in the session. We would still want to make that backup. It's less critical because Atrix is available for us to be able to reach back into prior periods to do reporting, but I always like having that safety net, if you will. Plus, I've got folks who need to make their year-end adjustments for things like shareholder insurance and mileage reimbursement type of stuff, company car usage and things. That, since we've got to be rolled into the current quarter in order to produce paychecks in January, we have to make that year-end backup so that we can do those adjustments in the prior version in order to print proper W-2s. When we do our closings, payroll only closes on the quarter. So you've got quarters 1, 2, 3, and 4 rather than periods possibly 1 through 12. That being said, I mentioned a little bit in the first part of the session that it is possible to reopen periods if we have to. Payroll is not one of those modules that we can do that with, because we will lose all kinds of data if we try to reopen an historical period. Depending on how much history you've got, your perpetual history will maintain itself when you do your closing. So we can go back and pull reports from prior years. And as I mentioned, Atrix has the ability to reach back into prior periods, but we want to be careful how we do that as far as what we're trying to look for and possibly from which copy we are working. What really happens during our year-end processing? In the legacy versions, things like your quarter-to-date and year-to-date earnings and deductions and taxes all get reset. That is why it is not plausible to reopen a prior period. Quarter-specific reports, if it has quarterly in the title, that will only show the current quarter's activity. There has been a report, that quarterly governmental report, that was used to facilitate your 940 reporting and even your unemployment reporting for your state. That stuff all gets reset and only displays the information for that current quarter. If you've got check history, that may be purged out unless you are electing to retain perpetual history. Terminated employees will be deleted based on what is called business rules. And this happened a few years ago where Sage added the option to maintain history for a minimum of 2 years for terminated employees. I think part of the reason for that was when we would close the year and those terminated employees disappeared, it became very difficult to run their W-2s because none of their static information remained. So they've set a minimum of 2 years, and that even changes with the Payroll 2.0. Then we get the calendar rolled into the appropriate quarter and year. If we're looking at Payroll 2.0, I recognize a few names out there of folks who are on version 2018 now. What's going to be a little bit different? You've got a setting for years to retain history. That minimum is 4. You can set it up higher, but you will hold at least 4 years now. If you're using direct deposit, those year-to-date totals will get reset to 0. Again, terminated employees, they will be deleted based on the business rules. And if you're utilizing the time off, which is what used to be considered the benefits, where you would have your benefit schedules, they renamed that a little bit and they updated its functionality. You will actually get good accruals for your calendar-based reset, and it will get those hours updated appropriately to the active employees. And then, of course, just like the legacy version, it rolls you into the correct quarter and year. So then you can do your check processing appropriately. Let's talk a little bit about Atrix. You must be on version 2016 or higher in order for the updates to work and to get your form updates. The program, the federal and state e-filing reporting, or what's called the federal tax reporting, that must be installed on any computer from which you are going to run those forms. Just because it's a menu option shown in Sage does not mean that it will work on your computer. And of course, you must keep your Sage 100 payroll subscription current, or else you won't be able to get those updates. What kind of forms can we get out of Atrix? If you haven't used this before, we have a wide variety of forms that we can get to. We've got federal forms and state forms, most of which can be printed without the use of pre-printed forms anymore. Almost everything except for pretty much the 1099s must go or may go on plain paper. Again, just to reiterate, the 1099 federal forms must be on red paper if you are going to submit those yourself. And of course, if you wish to e-file, by all means, we can help you with that and push that through Atrix, and Atrix will actually take on the responsibility. Once they get the file from you, then they are responsible for getting it submitted timely, and if there are any issues, they will work it out with you. State tax forms. I am most familiar with the Indiana forms, but for any of the other states that are represented, they've got the various unemployment and withholding forms. Again, most of the stuff can all be printed without the use of pre-printed forms. Some of your state forms can be e-filed. In Indiana, if you are issuing 25 or more employee W-2s to the state of Indiana, you must e-file. So you can try to print them out and send them in, but it is a law that you must e-file them. So if you only have 18 employees currently, but you had 26 employees through the course of the year, you generated 26 W-2s, you must do the e-filing. Updates to Atrix, they're starting to become kind of rampant, and we notice at this time of year, you might see 1 a day, 2, 3, 4 a week. You might even see a couple on a given day, depending on how often you get into the e-filing section or the reporting section. Atrix itself will prompt you to update if it detects that an update is needed. I think I've already updated mine this morning, so it may not get me through that, but those updates are pretty much required. You will want to do the automatic update function. Like I said, we may see a number of them not only through the rest of this month, but we'll also see them early into next month. So I'm going to pop over to our forms here in payroll. And we go down to our period end processing. This is a little different than the AP side that we saw earlier. Federal and state tax reporting is still done under period end processing. And when we go into it, like I said, I am using the newer version, the Payroll 2.0. For those of you on the older versions, you'll remember the box over here that lists the forms for you and the radio button from which you would pick federal, state, or existing. They've cleaned up this quite a bit. And so just to kind of show you a little bit of what this will look like down the road, again, if you have company maintenance set up that has all of this information, this will get populated from there. You will want to make sure you have your federal ID number in here at a bare minimum, or else it will not let you continue. If you see a note down here that says demo only, that means that Sage has not recognized your payroll subscription yet, and you can activate. You click on the activate button, it's going to go out and it's going to verify that your subscription is up to date, and the goal is that that demo only goes away. If it doesn't, let us know. We can help you with that. We've had that happen to a few people here recently. Once you've identified the form type that you want, we've got an actual lookup of the different forms that are out there. If you've just installed Atrix for the first time on your machine, it is very likely that it is a slightly older version that doesn't have the most current forms. Don't panic, because those will come through the Atrix updates, and you'll get prompted really the first time to get those updates, especially if these are dated prior to 2018. We're going to go ahead and pick a schedule, the 941 and the Schedule B. Go ahead and select that. You will note we can pick the quarter for which we are going to report. For those of you who have come off an older version, that is significantly different than before. So we can go ahead and pick which one we are in. My data currently is in the second quarter, so I'm going to use that as my example. Once you've got the correct quarter, go ahead and click on Proceed. And it's going to walk us through another wizard asking us some questions as needed to get the forms set up correctly. One of the things it says is, hey, by the way, make sure that you fill in all of the fields that are marked red, or else we won't let you continue. So you'll notice I've got a big red blob down here, and it's asking for how much did I deposit. And even if you didn't deposit anything, at least enter a 0. And of course, I typed over my name. So I want to make sure I'm on the correct field. And it will take me through the different pages. So this number does not populate because this form doesn't know how much you actually remitted. You'll have to add all that stuff up. So gather up all of your 941 deposits. And the goal is that the total taxes match the total deposits, so you have neither a refund nor you have to owe anything. On the second page, it's going to ask you what kind of filer are you. I would surmise that the majority of us are what are considered semi-weekly filers, meaning that we have to issue our payments right after our pay period has been processed. When we set up to be a semi-weekly schedule, whether it be every week or bi-weekly or twice a month or whatever, it's going to pop open the Schedule B for us. If we were doing the monthly filing, it would just ask us for the monthly totals. We can now see our Form 941, and it is going to pull in the data that is representative of the liabilities for those periods. Now, if any of you have been updated to Sage 100-2018 over the past couple of months, you will notice a very large lump sum figure in one of those dates. That is because when Sage did the data migration and conversion, it did not go back and reallocate to the individual periods. It just said, I'm going to take everything up until this point, and I'm going to drop it into the date that I got converted. If that is the case, all we have to do is just manually redistribute these to the correct pay periods so that we get the right liabilities lining up with the correct dates and get the correct correct monthly totals. And the goal is that the total liability for the quarter corresponds to the total liability based on the withholding calculations of the wages and the Social Security. If there are any differences, of course, we would want to figure out, did we miss a liability on the Schedule B, or did something really, really, really go wrong? And we can then go ahead and make the appropriate adjustments. We still want to make sure that we fill in any of the red fields because it will not let us continue. Once all of the information has been updated, we can start walking through the next step. It will ask you, hey, it looks like you filled in everything. Are you really sure that these are the numbers you want to report? You get an opportunity to go back in and edit, or if you're comfortable, you can go ahead and agree. Now it drops us into what's called the My Copy. And this particular iteration is a watermarked, unfileable copy of the form. It is fine if you want to print this out for your records. I do have people who would prefer not to have the watermark, and they would just simply prefer to go to a clean copy and keep one clean copy for themselves and remit a clean copy to the feds. We also get the option as to whether or not we want to e-file or if we want to print. We can e-file the 941s. In fact, Atrix will prompt you many times along the way, hey, do you want us to do this for you? We'll do it for you for a fee. You're welcome to go that route. If you want to physically print it out yourself, by all means you can. And you can ask for whatever copies that you want, whether you want 1 or 2 or 5. You can get that many copies as your formal copies. Once you are done, it'll ask if you finished processing. You can go ahead and say yes, or click the checkered flag, and your 941 forms have been completed. Let's talk a little bit about W-2s. For those of you who have not utilized the Atrix before, or you just need that refresher again, this is actually pretty awesome. We are going to pick up federal forms. We are going to find our W-2s, and you will note that it still tells me I'm on 2017. That's because those forms have not yet formally been updated. That is what we expect to come out next week sometime. Again, because we just started this up, it's looking at company information, so I need to get a number in here or else it will be angry with me. You will also notice that I can't change the quarter because this is an annual type of form. W-2s, the newer requirement that has come in is what kind of an employer are you? Are you some sort of not-for-profit organization? Are you some sort of state or local or federal government entity? If you are not, you just leave this at none apply. This is some sort of demographic reporting, I think, that the government is catching. And then we go ahead and we proceed. We're going to get some questions asked of us. Again, my data is a little skewed, so don't worry about that. We typically should not see this warning, especially once the forms have all been updated properly. Atrix walks us through a little wizard, and again, with regard to the test drive, I choose not to go through that route. I just go ahead and start processing, because I know I can either go back and correct what I've been working on, or I can start over. So I'm going to go ahead and say next. It's going to ask me to verify my company ID number. If that is incorrect, we will need to go fix that, because this is going to go on every document coming out. Do I have multiple companies that I'm tracking payroll? Again, I know of a number of my clients that have a company code that is exclusively for their officers and owners of the business. They don't want anybody else getting into that payroll, so they make it an exclusive company. But all of their other employees are being processed through a separate company, kind of the live company. You can use Atrix to roll those two together if you're filing under the same federal ID number. Otherwise, most of us are pretty much going to use the single payroll data file, and we'll just continue. Again, it will pull up information, and it will want to make sure that we have all of our I's dotted and T's crossed. If I am one of my company's employees, or maybe I'm the owner doing the processing, I'm filing for my own company. If you are a third-party tax preparer, you might opt for this because you're doing this processing for your client on your own system. That's kind of what that's about. If you're sitting in your client's office and you're doing it, just stick with the I'm processing for my own company. When we get into the state and local tax items, we're going to notice a few more choices here than what we had previously seen. We've got our state withholding. California has a state disability. Most of the states have their own unemployment. Having the appropriate tax account numbers for things like your unemployment aren't necessarily critical. It's just really good to have, because once you type those in and get them locked in, they will propagate to any of the other forms that you might be processing. In Indiana and in a number of other states, you will have your local withholdings. You might have city or county or school district. You'll have all of those local tax items that need to be defined and assigned to the appropriate state so that it knows where to print that information on the W-2s. You get a few more questions. Do you have anybody who is truly exempt from Social Security and Medicare? Do you have any clergy on whom you're reporting? Do you want to use control numbers? This is a throwback to the old days where we didn't have the computerized W-2s, so we would have a sequence of numbers on each W-2 to make sure that we weren't missing anything. They are not required. You are welcome to put them on if you want, but you don't have to. Do you have any employees who only want their forms sent to them electronically? If you're going to either e-file them and let Atrix send the forms out, you probably are going to say no to this question. Or if you print them yourself, again, you're going to say no. We're not going to email anybody their W-2s. If you want to put a control number on the W-3, we can specify that. It also wants to know, are you an agricultural, are you a military employer, are you a household employer, or the majority of us are going to be the 941 type of employer. The question about the not-for-profit or governmental entity carries forward from that opening screen, but we can change it here if we need to. Are you including any third-party sick pay in your W-2s? Did you have any income tax withheld? Do you have any other numbers that you are known to the government as, whether it be another employer ID number or what they call an establishment number? Did your business terminate this year? Is this the last time this business is going to be filing W-2s? You would go ahead and mark that. Once we've gone through the wizard of questions, it is basically going to get us into pretty much a spreadsheet, if you will. And very much like what we saw on the AP side of it, for those of you who were with us earlier, you will see the information split up between static information, so ID numbers, names, addresses, and so on, and then all of the numeric information. And what's really cool about this, first of all, we can slide the vertical bar and take a look at the different boxes. This is all the stuff that prints at the top of the W-2, including things like whether or not the employee was eligible for a retirement plan or whether they received third-party sick pay. And then all of the numeric data, Fed wages and withholdings, Social Security wages and withholdings, local wages and withholdings, any kind of additional box information like box 12 or box 14, things that need to be here. All of that stuff is captured in a spreadsheet. We may edit this on the fly. This was something we didn't have the ease of doing prior to the use of Atrix. However, any changes that we make on the form here will not record themselves back in your data. So if you make a bunch of changes and then you decide to start over, you will not get these changed values returned to you. You will have to start over with the changes that you've made. You'll get totals up here at the top, and this is really nice. The totals used to be all the way at the very bottom, so if you were scrolling through hundreds of employees, it was kind of tough to get to it. Now, if I scroll, then that all stays up at the top for me. You can use this to reconcile to make sure that you've got all of your total wages correct and all of your withholdings correct. The W-2 does not report gross wages. It reports taxable wages. So if you had any kind of Section 125 health insurance kind of deductions, those are already reducing the wage totals that are being reported. So if you're looking at like a perpetual history report and you've got total gross wages, you're not going to find that number being represented anywhere in the W-2. Okay. I know I am not going to be able to go much farther here because I will have a lot of errors, but we basically use the next wizard here. We can either click next step or the arrow, and Atrix is going to go out and it's going to evaluate the information, and it's going to let you know when it's angry. It says that there are some problems with the first name fields, and it highlights what those are. There are problems with address lines. That tells us that we can't have a blank first address line. We've got Social Security numbers that are invalid, and it's going to highlight those for us as well. And it's going to force us to go back and correct those things. Now, you can either go back and correct it in the employee master, which is probably the right thing to do so that it's correct going forward, or if it's just maybe one or two, you could correct it here on the fly by just simply typing in one of the highlighted boxes. And then as you go to reprocess, do the next again, it will go back and find any other errors. You'll notice my one field corrected itself. It's no longer an erroneous field, but it will not let you go any farther until you have all of this updated properly. Once we get through the static information, it is going to walk us through the numeric information. if it detects any miscalculations, so let's say, for example, our Social Security wages and our that is tough to say, Social Security taxes don't calculate correctly, it will flag us and it will let us know that there is a discrepancy. And again, we would have to figure out why that is in error. I've got a really great question here. Is this form downloadable to Excel? It is not. Well, actually, help me out, Brad. I don't believe that it is.
No, I do not believe that it is either. I think I've had that question come up before. We can certainly make a quick note and try to verify that. I'm wondering if I also had the question if it was possible to get data into that from Excel. Maybe
I do not believe so.
No, I don't either. I've had a couple questions about that over the years, and I don't think it is either.
I know a lot of people prefer playing around with Excel because you can do the calculations, but this is as close as they can get us where we can at least type the numbers in that need to be typed in. Anybody else have any questions? I feel like I'm flying relatively quickly, but I know there's a lot of good information and we do have a little bit of a limited window. So again, once we get all the way through, we'll be prompted into an area where we can review the W-2s. We've got the ability to print the various copies that we are asking for. If we're opting to e-file, then that e-file will get uploaded to Atrix, and then they can take care of the rest of it. So a lot of good things here. Brad and I are going to be available pretty much from here through the end of January in order to help you if you've got questions specifically. I just ask if you know a particular date that you're going to be running W-2s, maybe give one of us a shout and let us know well ahead of time so that we can block that time to be available. I know already I'm getting people who've requested me to assist them right around the first of the year and then also into the first part of the month. So we just want to make sure somebody's going to be available to help you with your questions. Okay, I do have some screens here just quickly showing you the verification of the account, the buttons you might expect to see when you have to do an update. And there are some choices here. I always encourage do the automatic update. However, something that we have come across over the last few years is the ability for Atrix to update on your specific computer. There are a number of things that might be keeping that from updating properly, and it is most likely related to security settings in Internet Explorer. Do make note, Sage utilizes Internet Explorer as its background for processing things through the internet. And so some tips here that we offer to you is to add the website sagemass.atrix.com to your trusted websites. Allow these particular programs through on the privacy tab, atrix.com, atrixforms.exe, and so on. Check your firewall. Make sure that port 80 is open and will allow you to access the site updates.atrix.com. That can help facilitate the automatic download and installation. If you're still running into issues, however, we can manually download the update and install it. This is the website that you'll go to. It's atrix.com/sagemass. There will be a link on that page for Sage 100. You click on that link, save that file to your local workstation or to the workstation where this is going to be running, and then go ahead and run it. If you've got permissions on the local workstation such that you are not at least a power user, you probably won't be able to install this. So that's something you can work with your network people to make sure that the user has the ability to install software properly. And then after you get that updated, you may still get the automatic update prompt. It should go through. If not, let us know. We can help you get past that. Even though it will prompt you for the automatic update, it probably won't download or install anything because everything should be current by then. A couple of notes here to get ready to wrap things up. Because you have active maintenance with Sage, you have the ability to access their customer portal. What is contained in the customer portal is a knowledge base. It is basically the same knowledge base that we have, that we use as Sage 100 consultants. It's a place where you can do searches on error messages or have questions. You have access to product information like spec sheets and things like that. You have access to the Sage software downloads. So if you are endeavoring to install the IRD or your tax table updates yourself, you have the ability to go get those files. If you are ever concerned about doing that and you want some help with that, please reach out. We can help you with that. If you don't have credentials or you don't remember your credentials to the Sage partner or customer portal, unfortunately, we don't have any of that information with which to help you. The best that we can come up with is whether or not you're registered to access the portal. You would have to contact Sage in order to get your credentials refreshed. Okay, Payroll 2.0. I recognize a few names that are already on the new platform, so this is really kind of old hat for you. But what has changed in Payroll 2.0? Well, first of all, we're on the new business framework, and that means we've got the updated data entry screens. We also have an inclusion of departmental security, and along with that, we have the ability to process payroll in multiple batches. So what we can do now, when we were walking through Atrix, I had mentioned that there was the ability to combine multiple companies to roll all of the W-2 information together. We might have officers and owners in one company, we might have our regular employees in the other company, but we want to process one set of W-2s. With the departmental security and the payroll batches, we can now preclude users from even seeing information that is more confidential. And then you can have an employee process a batch of, let's say, the normal salary and hourly workers, and you can have an authorized person process the payroll for the officers and the owners, and have that all processed together from one company. So that's kind of cool. The crystal-based reports, all of your standard reports are now written in crystal reports, which makes it a lot easier for us to modify them with you. And then the other thing that is really, really new, and this is why we're not necessarily doing any more updates this year, are how the tax tables are integrated. What Payroll 2.0 does is it actually creates a concept called tax profiles. And so rather than having to go to the taxes button and pick out I'm filing as married and for the federal, and I want 3 exemptions and 5 dependents, and then in the state I have to file however many exemptions I want, and I want additional withholding, and I have to pick the exact local, and I want to do any additional withholding with that. All of that stuff goes away, and it all kind of gets married into one profile. So if I've got employees that are to be set up similarly, we can set up a profile, and it makes it really easy to assign that profile to different users to get them set up. As far as the conversion is concerned, when we bring you up off of 2016 or 2017, we have to go through and evaluate what all of those profiles need to be so that we can be positioned to assign those to the employees. So let's take a little look here at some of the new things. I've got a couple minutes, but I still have some time to open up for questions. So if we go into our payroll and we go into employee maintenance, I want to show you what some of those new screens look like. Right away, you'll see it's a little bit cleaner screen. We go into an employee, and we've got the address information. That's all pretty much the same, social and birth date, whether or not that employee is using direct deposit. But then you'll notice some of the demographic information has been spread out a little bit. You know, what's their job title? Are they full or part-time? Are they seasonal? Are they active, inactive, or terminated? We've got some additional date fields here. So what's their hire date? What's their review date? If they were terminated and then rehired, we can have a separate field for the rehire date. We have on the additional tab some more of the demographics, but we also have 2 contact fields now. We had been limited to 1 previously. We can mark whether or not the employee is a veteran and when they might have separated from their branch. Instead of, well, it's previously been called the benefit schedules. Actually, what they are now called are the time off codes. They still have the very similar function of doing the accruals if you want them to, or at least establishing limits. We've got that information. We've got our W-2 withholding things that are a little bit different than our normal wages. We've got the running totals of those for where we are during the year. For the medical coverage, are they eligible for medical coverage and at what date were they made eligible? That's some information that's really helpful in preparing for the Affordable Care Act reportings. Taxes, this is huge. This is where things are different. Instead of setting up the federal, the state, and the local, what we do is we set up a profile and we assign that profile to that employee. So if I pick a different profile, then I would get different settings here as to how that employee will get taxed. And you'll notice I have a residence and a work. I did go through this with one of my clients where they might have employees living in different counties or cities, and they are working in the same place. We want to be careful how we set this up in order to get the proper tax treatment. So, you know, discuss it with us, let us know. We will make sure that we get things set up properly for you. Pay information, a lot of differences here. The biggest one is the fact that we actually have 9 pay rates that we can track for an employee. That is different. We were limited to 2 previously. We still have the automatic earnings, and whether they are weekly default or an hourly employee, if they're a salaried employee, are they exempt from overtime? Alternate employee check name. When we fill in the last name, first name, middle name stuff, by default, that is what will print on the check. I've got a number of clients who have employees that have a lot of hyphenated names and things don't always fit. We now have a field into which we can get that information to fit more properly. We can see the running total of our earnings based on year-to-dates and quarters. We can see a similar layout in our deductions. You might notice that our earnings and deduction codes are now 6 characters in length. So that means we don't have to be quite as creative when we abbreviate things. Our paycheck history, let me get one that has a paycheck here. Oh, that's fine. Put him back. No, we don't. There we go. There we go. when I go look at my pay history, I've got a binocular here that I can use to filter my date ranges, or I can filter by check numbers, or I can filter by earnings. I can also flip my calendar year for whatever various calendar years there might be. I get the flag of whether they are inactive or terminated there. I can set up their ACA information, or I can review a tax summary. And I can just toggle between the jurisdictions, or if I want to look at specific quarters, we can now break that down a little bit better. I can even see time worked. I can see what benefits might have occurred during that period, or I can get into details month by month for wages, taxes, time. So a lot more information is available up front. Last thing I want to do is just real quickly run through payroll data entry, because that part is a little bit different. We still get the pay cycle screen, which is great, but what we can do with the pay cycle screen now is we pick what our pay period is, and we can either enter the starting or the ending date, and it will calculate what the pay period end date is based on the pay cycle. You will also note that we put the check date right here up front. That will help us tremendously in making sure that we date the check correctly. A lot of times we get caught, we forget to change it by the time we come back to print, and we really want it to be something different. So if we do it up front, it will carry forward for us. I mentioned the batch entry. If we enable the batch entry, just like anywhere else where we have batches in the software, we can pick the current batch in which we're working, or we can start a separate batch, and that is independently updated from any of the other batches. So some cool stuff with that. Actually, let me get in real fast here and get an employee started. We can automatically pay employees if we have that set up. But if you look at the data entry screen now, it is a little bit different. It's a little bit cleaner. Days, weeks worked, and so on. Pick an employee here. And it does get angry at us if we try to pick off somebody with an inappropriate pay cycle. So let me reset that to weekly. Grab an employee here. And if I go look at my lines, what I have, A, is a screen that I can make bigger. It's also got the ability to drag columns into my line of sight, just like I do with my other data entry screens. I can get rid of things that I don't care to see and pull those down out of my line of sight. I've got the ability, the more grid-like data entry. So it's a lot cleaner, it's a lot fresher, but really it's all still the same. Once we get the data entered, we are still going to do the actual calculations, run our data entry audit reports, run our different registers and expense summaries, and go into our check printing. So none of the day-to-day functionality has changed. It's just how we have changed the style of the data that's being entered. And with that, I've got a hand up for a question. You want to type that in for us, please, Terry? And Tanya, if you've got questions. And I am opening up the floor now because that pretty much covers everything I wanted to go over with you today. Okay, that's cool, no worries. Again, if any of you needs CPE, by all means, send your request to Shannon, and she will help you out. If you've got any questions Oh gosh, yay, good stuff going on. Couple good questions. The first one having to do with the current version that the user is running. Theoretically, we can upgrade you to Payroll 2.0, or you could have been upgraded at any point. Like I had mentioned earlier, Brad and I really aren't in a position to handle any major payroll upgrades right now, so what we are doing is looking into the first part of next year. And if you would like assistance from us, by all means reach out and we will help you with that. You may still process your year-end tax forms with version 2016, but after this year end, we definitely will want to consider getting you moved up at least one more version, but more likely into 2018. Time card module. That technically is not updated yet with version 2018 in payroll. Brad, can you remind me, or do you recall what status of that is?
I do not know the current status of that right now.
Okay. Yes, that was a very heavy sigh. I apologize. We're going to make note of that question, and then we'll put out some information once we get a little bit of more detail that we can share with you on that. I just was aware that if you are on time card, we can't get you to 2018 just yet. All right. Does anybody else have any other questions? Well, we really appreciate everybody taking the time to be with us here today. Thank you so very much. Hopefully this was informative for you. And if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Brad or to me, or if you've got another standard consultant with whom you work from our office, reach out to them and they can hunt us down. We are always happy to assist in any way that we can. We are recording this, so if you do want a recording, I forgot to mention, just let us know and we can pass the link over to you after I get it converted. And if not, I will go ahead and conclude the session and bid everyone a fabulous rest of the afternoon and a very blessed holiday season.